For decades, people have looked at the Gripen as if it were a simple machine with an equally simple purpose. An affordable, lightweight fighter created for nations that can't or don't want to spend billions on the most expensive platforms. In many ways, that reputation worked. It made the aircraft appear predictable, easy to categorize, and almost safe in a world dominated by giants like the F-35, F-22, Rafale, and Eurofighter. But what if that basic assumption is quietly falling apart? What if the most underestimated part of this aircraft, the engine, ends up becoming the trigger for a major geopolitical shift? And what if a single change under its skin ends up redrawing political maps, industrial connections, and even the future of Western air power? Most people who follow aviation casually assume that jets upgrade through better radars, new electronic warfare systems, or more advanced weapons. But hidden beneath all that is the real catalyst of change: the power plant. And in the case of the modern Gripen E and Gripen F, the story becomes even more interesting. For years, Saab has presented the platform as nimble, efficient, and cost-effective. Those points were true. These newer versions have improved sensors, longer range, more payload, and better endurance. Everything you'd expect in a 21st century fighter. But the real transformation sits in a place most viewers never think about. That transformation is the General Electric F-414 engine, the same family powering several well-known American aircraft. Producing roughly 22,000 pounds of thrust, it gives the Gripen E the muscle it needs to challenge much heavier competitors while still keeping its signature low operating cost. The throttle response, suited for demanding fast jet maneuvers, makes the aircraft surprisingly capable for its size. This engine is the reason the Gripen E carries more fuel, flies longer missions, and supports larger sensors without compromising agility. It's the foundation on which Saab built its small jet, big punch narrative. But power is only half the story. Politics makes up the rest. Choosing an engine is not at all like choosing a radar or a missile. When a country selects an engine, especially one built overseas, it ties itself to the supplier's industrial network, its spare parts pipeline, and most importantly, its foreign policy. The Gripen's reliance on the American F-414 means that every nation that buys it also inherits a degree of dependence on U.S. export approvals, upgrade decisions, and long-term maintenance access. For many allies, that's a reasonable trade-off. For others, especially countries seeking to diversify their defense ties, the dependency can become a strategic liability. Now imagine the equation shifts. Imagine what happens when Sweden, or any future Gripen customer, considers replacing the American F-414 with a new engine from Rolls-Royce, a European consortium, or even a local national supplier. That possibility is no longer hypothetical. Over the last several years, there has been active lobbying, quiet negotiations, and growing industrial pressure surrounding the idea of a non-American engine option for the Gripen. What was once a purely technical conversation has turned into a geopolitical tug-of-war. If such a shift were to happen, the aircraft would cease to be just a Swedish jet with American hardware. It would become the nucleus of an entirely new industrial ecosystem, one connecting European or Asian manufacturers, cross-border supply chains, and local assembly lines. The technical benefits would matter, but the political and economic implications would matter even more. Consider the original design intent. The Gripen E and Gripen F were created to be modern yet affordable fighters. They possess a sharp collection of sensors, a streamlined cockpit, and enough weapons capacity to remain relevant in fast-changing conflict scenarios. But like every fighter in history, their room to grow, whether longer range, heavier payloads, or next-generation sensors, ultimately depends on the engine. The F-414 gave the Gripen E a huge leap forward compared to older Gripen variants. Without it, the aircraft's current performance profile wouldn't exist. Yet capability is only one dimension. Dependence is another. If a nation buys a fighter whose engine is controlled by a single foreign government, then that government gains a permanent influence over that nation's air force. Spare parts, overhaul cycles, and software updates all require ongoing political clearance. For U.S. allies, that's usually manageable. But for countries wanting strategic autonomy, diversified partnerships, or maximal control over their own defense industry, dependence on a single American supplier can be uncomfortable. That discomfort is one of the main reasons so many countries today support local engine development, joint ventures, or alternative non-U.S. suppliers. And it is exactly why engine decisions have become so politically charged in recent years. Enter Rolls-Royce. Although best known for its civil engines, Rolls-Royce has spent years rebuilding its military portfolio. Its research partnerships and long-term ambitions suggest that it wants to play a major role in next-generation fighter propulsion. If a company like Rolls-Royce or a broader European partnership were to create an engine suitable for the Gripen, the global fighter market would change overnight. Nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and even Europe that currently hesitate due to U.S. export controls might suddenly have a new option. Countries like South Korea, India, Brazil, and others are already exploring engine diversification, not just for performance benefits but for political independence, industrial growth, and job creation. If a reliable non-American engine emerged for an aircraft like the Gripen, it would offer something extremely rare. High performance without heavy geopolitical strings attached. And this is where the story becomes especially relevant for Canadians and Americans watching this content. A change in the Gripen's engine supply chain isn't just about Sweden. It's about the direction of Western defense industries, the evolution of NATO partnerships, and the future of North American air power. If Saab were to offer an engine choice that included deeper tech transfer, local assembly, or regional production lines, it could reshape the industrial landscape from Europe to the Americas. The implications wouldn't be limited to fighter jets. They would extend to jobs, research centers, and long-term economic benefits, issues deeply important to taxpayers in both the United States and Canada. The engine conversation is also tightly connected to export regulations. U.S. engines fall under specific American export laws, and those laws can restrict upgrades, resale, and co-development efforts. This reality has influenced dozens of procurement decisions worldwide. For some countries, American restrictions are acceptable. For others, they're deal breakers. If a vendor offered an alternative engine free of such restrictions, the Gripen's potential market might expand dramatically. This brings us back to the central point. An engine is never just a piece of hardware. It is an instrument of influence. Governments and corporations understand this clearly. They know that whoever controls engine supply chains also shapes alliances, industrial dependencies, and long-term strategic behavior. That's why nations and companies are now pushing for technology transfer agreements, joint ventures, and development partnerships more aggressively than ever. These deals affect not only military operations, but also civilian industries, advanced manufacturing, metallurgy, energy systems, and materials research. Most viewers don't realize how deep engine politics reach. But if you're an American or Canadian taxpayer between the ages of 40 and 65, this story affects you far more than it may seem. Engine suppliers determine where jobs are created, where maintenance hubs are located, and whether your country holds genuine control over its air force. They influence whether upgrades can be done locally, whether the aircraft can be used freely during international operations, and how well your nation can respond during emergencies. And the Gripen sits right at the center of this unfolding shift. The deeper you look into the Gripen story, the more obvious it becomes that this isn't just a conversation about aviation engineering. It's really a conversation about influence. Who has it, who wants it, and who is trying to shape it for the next decade. And engines, more than any other single component, determine how that influence flows. A nation that owns the intellectual property, the tooling, the maintenance rights, and the export authority for a fighter's engine essentially holds a long-term, strategic tether around the countries that operate that aircraft. This is why the Gripen's current reliance on the American-built F-414 matters so much. The engine itself is excellent, reliable, powerful, and cost-efficient. But the geopolitical reality around that engine carries weight. Every upgrade, every part shipment, every export clearance flows through U.S. channels. For NATO members, this is usually practical. But for countries who want a wider diplomatic playbook, it can be limiting. And here's the twist that many viewers in the United States and Canada tend to underestimate. The global market is changing. Traditional suppliers no longer dominate by default. Nations with rising defense budgets, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and several African and Latin American states, want more than a fighter jet. They want industrial participation, technology transfers, skilled workforce development, and long-term production roles. They want a seat at the table. This is where alternative engine suppliers come in. As mentioned in Part 1, Rolls-Royce has been slowly rebuilding its position in the military propulsion sector. But they're not alone. Several European consortiums have been forming around next-generation engine concepts. Asian manufacturers are seeking cooperation agreements. What used to be a marketplace controlled by 3 or 4 major Western companies has evolved into a highly competitive arena. And the Gripen, with its modular design philosophy, sits in a perfect intersection point where multiple engine suppliers could theoretically compete. This isn't speculation. It's already happening across the global industry. Engine makers in multiple countries have been lobbying, negotiating, and floating proposals to either supply future Gripen variants or partner with Saab on next-generation propulsion solutions. Some of these discussions include tech transfer elements, local assembly, and cross-border engineering programs, exactly the kind of industrial incentives many emerging economies desperately want. If a non-American engine option emerges, the Gripen instantly becomes more attractive to nations uncomfortable with U.S. restrictions. Suddenly, a Gripen buyer could enjoy modern fighter capabilities without needing Washington's approval for every upgrade. And for those of you in the United States and Canada listening to this, that raises important strategic questions. Would such a shift strengthen Western alliances by giving more partners access to advanced aircraft? Or would it weaken U.S. influence by reducing reliance on American engine technology? This is where North American audiences usually split in the comments. Many Americans argue that maintaining U.S. control over engine exports is crucial for ensuring Allied security alignment. Others believe that offering allies more independence can reduce friction and build trust. Meanwhile, Canadian viewers often highlight their discomfort with being overly dependent on U.S. export systems, especially when it comes to Arctic sovereignty and NORAD responsibilities. This is why your comments matter more than you think, because the question is genuinely complex, and it's one that policymakers are quietly wrestling with today. Let's go deeper into the technical and economic realities. Switching an engine on an aircraft is not like swapping a battery. It requires redesigning air intakes, adjusting weight distribution, recalibrating fuel systems, adapting cooling mechanisms, and rewriting maintenance workflows. It demands flight testing, structural assessments, and significant engineering adaptation. That's why the content you heard earlier stated plainly that a car's engine can be changed differently from an airplane's. It's a costly and risky process, but it's not impossible, and that's exactly why the discussion is gaining traction. Defense industries and national governments are highly motivated by big strategic payoffs. If a new engine supplier promises not only a competitive power plant, but also local job creation, regional production facilities, and technology transfer that trains local engineers, many nations will consider the trade-off worth the cost. For countries investing in long-term defense industrial capabilities, this kind of opportunity is simply too valuable to dismiss. Look at nations with growing military budgets and industrial ambitions. Brazil, India, South Korea. These countries are not just buying equipment, they are building ecosystems. A Gripen powered by a European or Asian engine could offer them a more favorable partnership, fewer restrictions, and a pathway toward greater self-sufficiency. Local assembly lines, specialized maintenance hubs, and training pipelines would become national assets for decades. Saab, for its part, has already structured the Gripen program to be export-friendly. Their business model includes collaboration with local industries, flexible production arrangements, and offset packages that give buyers meaningful participation. This makes the idea of a Gripen with multiple engine options not only plausible but strategically consistent with Saab's approach. From a North American perspective, this raises another question. Would this benefit or challenge U.S. and Canadian defense interests? Canada, for example, has long struggled to balance its security relationship with the United States and its desire for greater industrial independence. Many Canadians still carry the memory of the Avro Aero, a symbol of a lost domestic aerospace future. A fighter program that includes meaningful Canadian participation, especially one that isn't bound entirely by USS engine export controls, would resonate strongly with Canadian voters, engineers, and defense officials. In the U.S., reactions would likely be more divided. Some see strategic value in allowing allies to build more of their own capabilities. Others view it as a potential erosion of American defense influence. But whichever stance you take, it's undeniable that engine diversification would reshape the global balance in ways Americans should be paying attention to. Now, let's shift back to the technical realities outlined earlier. The F-414, described in the original content as now an adult, is a mature, combat-proven engine. Any alternative would have to match or exceed its performance while fitting into the Gripen's design envelope. That includes thrust output, fuel efficiency, heat tolerance, and airflow requirements. If a new engine is heavier, burns more fuel, or requires different intake shaping, the aircraft's flight characteristics would change. This is where trade-offs become critical. Countries must balance the advantages of political freedom and industrial gain against the cost and risk of redesign. And engine manufacturers must consider whether the long-term revenue from sales, upgrades, and maintenance justifies the investment. Developing or adapting a fighter engine is one of the most expensive undertakings in the defense industry. Yet many nations have demonstrated they're willing to pay more upfront if it means greater strategic control later. Owning your maintenance pipelines, your spare parts production, and your upgrade paths is often worth the initial cost, because the alternative is long-term vulnerability. This brings us to export restrictions. The original content emphasized how U.S. export control laws affect decisions around the world. These rules limit which nations can receive certain technologies, and under what conditions. For some countries, American restrictions are acceptable. For others, they create political friction or diplomatic complications. If an alternative engine option avoids those constraints, the Gripen's market potential expands immediately. This isn't abstract theory. These dynamics shape everyday procurement choices. Countries carefully consider who they want to depend on for the next 30 to 40 years, the typical lifespan of a fighter jet. Engine suppliers are not just technology providers, they're long-term strategic partners, which leads to a closing point for Part 2. Every time a nation selects an engine, it sends a message. It signals alignment, trust, and long-term cooperation with the industrial base of the supplier's home country. In today's world, where alliances are shifting and regional power balances are increasingly delicate, those signals carry enormous weight. As we move toward the final part of this discussion, the core idea becomes impossible to ignore. An aircraft engine is never just about performance. It is a strategic anchor that binds nations together, sometimes for decades. And the Gripen, more than most fighter programs, illustrates how one component can influence national autonomy, industrial evolution, and even regional power balances. Throughout Parts 1 and 2, we looked at the technical, economic, and political reasons why countries might consider shifting away from a U.S.-controlled engine like the F-414. But it's equally important to acknowledge the other side. The F-414 is proven, robust, and deeply embedded in Western supply chains. That maturity has real value. Any new engine supplier, whether Rolls-Royce or a broader European or Asian consortium, must equal or surpass that reliability while offering a package that justifies the redesign, the testing, and the financial risk involved. Yet despite these challenges, momentum is building. Governments and corporations around the world are increasingly investing in programs that promise not just new engines, but long-term industrial partnerships. They understand that whoever shapes tomorrow's propulsion technology will influence far more than fighter jets. These innovations spill over into commercial aviation, materials science, energy systems, and advanced manufacturing. In other words, engine technology is one of the few areas where military investment directly accelerates national economic strength. For countries debating the Gripen today, this matters. If a buyer can secure not only a capable engine, but also local assembly, technology transfer agreements, or a role in the long-term supply chain, the benefits ripple through the economy. Jobs multiply. Universities gain new research opportunities. Skilled labor grows. And political leaders gain a narrative of independence rather than dependence. This is why the earlier statement, "engines are levers," rings so true. A shift in engine supply can redirect alliances, deepen regional partnerships, or create new spheres of influence. It can determine which nations cooperate in emergencies, who can share upgrades without restrictions, and who can maintain freedom of action when global tensions rise. And for American and Canadian viewers, these aren't distant issues. They directly influence the future of North American defense collaboration, Arctic sovereignty, NORAD modernization, and the health of local aerospace industries. Whether a future Gripen includes American, European, or mixed engine origins, will shape not only foreign markets, but also the industrial and geopolitical environment in which both our countries operate. So here is the real takeaway. The Gripen has always been praised for its flexibility, but its greatest potential may lie in what happens next. If alternative engine suppliers can match the F-14's performance while providing stronger industrial terms and fewer political barriers, the Gripen could redefine its role in the global market. A single aircraft could become the center of a much larger realignment, one involving technology, strategy, and the balance of power itself. If you enjoyed this deep look into how a single engine can reshape global strategy, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next breakdown of defense technology and geopolitics. Your support helps us keep producing high-quality content that cuts through the noise and explains what really drives decisions in the air, on the ground, and behind the scenes. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Do you think countries should push harder for engine independence, even if it means higher upfront costs? Would a future Gripen with a non-American engine make sense for nations looking for more flexibility? And how do you see engine politics affecting North American defense cooperation over the next decade? Share your perspective in the comments. This community always brings valuable insights, and your voice genuinely helps shape future topics. Thank you so much for watching, for thinking critically, and for being part of this growing channel. Wishing all of you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.